Yeah, awesome, man. So look, we're ready when you are. Perfect timing.
Okay, sounds good. Okay then. If you don't like the idea of constantly learning new skills and keeping your knowledge up to date, then software development is probably not the right field for you. Actually, with technology disrupting pretty much every profession, I'd say that this is now true of any job. But in software engineering, um, innovation happens at a particularly overwhelming pace, and it can be a challenge for developers to keep up. Here's a little bit about myself. My name is Zeeshan Meghi. I've been a software developer for 9 years. I currently work as a technical lead at Trader Corporation, the makers of Autotrader.ca. I write a blog, and recently I've become really interested in blockchain technology. So I've been participating in the 100 Days of Web3 Challenge, where I learned something new about blockchain technology or the emerging decentralized web known as Web3. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you haven't already. Let's talk about how fast software changes. To do that, let's consider the concept of long term in software. Here are two of the biggest backend frameworks out there, Node.js and .NET Core. With Node.js, long-term support versions are supported only 2.5 years after the initial release. So once that time has passed, if your application depends on this version, you have to go and update it, or you can risk some serious security vulnerabilities. With .NET Core, the long-term support versions are supported just 3 years after the initial release. So this should tell you that even among very established technology, the meaning of long-term is really just 2 to 3 years at the most. Here are some skills that were once very valuable to have, but have since fallen out of favor. I've actually seen some interviews with developers where the developer received negative feedback just because they said that they knew one of these skills. Now, we don't want to be developers that are hanging on to outdated skills. We want to constantly innovate and learn new skills. It's good to learn with purpose, and to that end, it's worth asking a few guiding questions before learning. The first question is, what do you want to learn? You really need to know what your goal is because, especially in software, there are so many things to learn out there that if you don't know exactly what you're trying to learn, it's just too easy to get distracted. It's also worth considering why you want to learn something. And this is very important because it's going to determine how you apply this skill. If you're learning something to use it at your current role, that's great because chances are you're going to apply that skill very soon after initially learning it. And this is really going to help you to retain that skill. I can't tell you how many times I've spent so many hours learning a skill, and a year later, I've forgotten 99% of that. If you're learning a skill that isn't directly applicable to your current role, it's probably worth creating a small project that leverages that skill or perhaps contributing to open source software which uses that skill. You should also consider how much time you have to learn because this is going to affect how you prioritize your learning plan, and it's also going to affect which resources you use to learn. And there are many resources out there for learning development skills, and we're going to talk about a few of them. I'll try to focus on ones which I feel are not talked about as much. One of the most effective ways of keeping your development skills up to date is to learn from your own teammates. This is actually one of the most efficient and fastest methods. The reason for this is because your teammates have a very good idea of what you know and what you don't know. They won't waste time trying to teach you things you already know. And you also have a shared reference from all the projects you've worked on together. And for this reason, your teammates can teach you something or explain something to you much faster than anyone else. It's really important to have a culture of learning within your team because often when one developer in a team learns a skill, it's very likely to spread throughout the whole team. So you can probably imagine that if you have a development team where every developer in the team is constantly learning new skills and sharing it with the rest of the team, then this is going to be a way to produce a very technically effective team. Another great way to learn from your own team is pair programming. In pair programming, you would often observe what another developer is doing in a lot of detail, and you'll pick up things that you wouldn't have otherwise seen. You can take what you've noticed and immediately apply it to your own development workflow. And since you've already seen how it's done, you don't need to spend extra time learning how. Another great way to learn from your team, and this is something I also heard from the other speakers, is to have lunch and learn sessions or demos. In these sessions, one team member can teach the rest of the team about a skill they've learned or about a project they're working on. And again, because of the effectiveness of communication between teammates, this is a really quick way of learning. Another often overlooked way of learning is to read the code base, understand, and contribute to open source software. With more traditional learning methods such as books and video courses, you can only get so far. And that's because with these traditional sources, they will teach you the fundamentals of a technology, and they may teach you a couple of examples of how to apply that. However, often the usage in the real world is a bit different. And a great way to see how it's used in the real world is to look at commonly used open source projects. This will help you learn at an advanced level because this is a real application of the skill. Often if you get stuck trying to understand open source software, there's help available from the community through some sort of forum or similar site. And again, if you're learning a skill that's not directly applicable to your current role, then applying it to open source software, contributing to open source software that leverages that skill is a great way to gain experience. One more very underrated way of keeping your development knowledge up to date is listening to podcasts. Now, podcasts have really exploded in recent years, and development podcasts are no exception to that. There are so many podcasts out there that are focused on specific technologies and areas such as .NET, Azure, React, and many more. This is a really great way to stay aware of the most recent developments within a technology. Typically within these podcasts, the host will have a section of the podcast where they'll tell you about the recent updates within that week or that month. And it's much easier to get your updates this way than to go do the research yourself. Also, podcasts are very easy to digest because they're conversational in nature. Often it's like listening to two of your colleagues having a discussion about a particular problem they're working on. And if this podcast is relevant to technology that you use, there's a very good chance these conversations are going to relate to your current work and help you out in your current role. Podcasts are also really convenient and can be consumed while doing something else, such as driving. So if you're really short on time, this is the method for you for keeping your knowledge up to date. Online video courses are often the go-to way for developers to learn new skills, and there are lots of platforms available out there such as Pluralsight and Udemy. One suggestion I'd make is try to find a platform that is tailored or specific to what you are trying to learn. So for example, I've been trying to learn how to program smart contracts for blockchains. And I found a couple of platforms such as Morales Academy and Eat the Blocks, which are just focused on blockchain development. And the advantage of platforms that are specific or tailored like this is that a strong community tends to form around them, and it makes it very easy to collaborate with other developers and also to get help if you're stuck. Often when developers take these video courses, they feel very pressured to watch them from start to end. And what I'd advise is just focus on the parts of the course that matter to you, and you can save yourself some time. And also frequently these courses will say that you need certain prerequisite courses, but if you're already comfortable with those skills, you can once again save yourself some time, skip the prerequisites, and just take the course you're interested in. And then there are lots of traditional resources out there for learning development skills. Books are a great way of learning skills in more depth. However, I just caution to check the publication date of the book, because if it hasn't been updated recently, there's a pretty good chance that the content is out of date. Books can be a great tool for learning architectural concepts. So for example, if you wanted to learn about domain-driven design, a great way would be to read the book Domain-Driven Design by Eric Evans. Blogs can also be a great source of learning material, especially for tutorials where you quickly apply a certain technology. I also write some tutorials on my own blog. You can always fall back on the official documentation as well. Frequently, the official documentation for various technology will have some kind of getting started or quick start guide. This can be a really good resource if you're just trying to quickly apply technology without learning it in too much depth. And in the absence of other resources, you can fall back on the official documentation, assuming it's present, of course. Then there's also community platforms such as Stack Overflow. And Stack Overflow is not just for asking specific technical questions, but it can also be a way to ask for advice on how to learn particular skills. So now that you know what you want to learn and how you're going to learn it, it's probably worth creating a roadmap for yourself where you decide what you're going to learn in what order and at what time. Here's a very simple roadmap for someone who wants to learn the basics of backend development in a month. So they could split it up into three parts. They could say they need to learn databases, server-side languages, and backend frameworks. And they could say that they would spend a week on each of those components and then spend the rest of the month building a simple project like an API. However, roadmaps can get quite complicated, and in fact, this is another roadmap for learning backend web development. This one is considerably more sophisticated, covers many different types of authentication, different kinds of databases, and so on. So it's really up to you how simple or complex you want to make your roadmap. One piece of advice I'd give for any roadmap is to have time constraints on each item in the roadmap. This way, you're putting yourself under pressure to learn that skill within a certain time frame, and you're also ensuring that you're not spending too much time on any one item in the roadmap. If roadmaps are too structured for you and involve too much upfront planning, you could also try a 100-day challenge. You may have heard of the 100 Days of Code challenge, which is typically used by people who are first learning to code. And within this challenge, a person would spend an hour coding every day, and then they would share on social media what they did during that day. There are many variations on the 100 Days of Code challenge, such as 100 Days of Cloud or 100 Days of Web3, where you can focus specifically on what you're interested in learning. And you can tailor the rules of this 100-day challenge to suit your specific situation. If you don't have an hour every day, you can say you'll spend 15 minutes every day. I'm about halfway through a 100-day challenge, and I can say that it's really great for keeping yourself accountable and also for learning more consistently. I hope I've convinced you that it's really important to keep your development skills sharp and that you now have some tools for doing that. Thanks for listening.
What is one lesson for you, Zeeshan, that stuck out in your development career that you're like, if I had known this 2 or 3 years ago, maybe I wouldn't or would have done things differently? So just recap, what's something that you've learned that you think's been really important to your career to date?
Well, one thing I've learned, which is really important, is to be proactive. Often, when you're developing code or looking at existing code bases, you'll find problems that could be an issue in the future, but you might let them go because it doesn't look like they're going to be an immediate problem. But ultimately, these things will always come back to haunt you. So it's always important to be proactive, not wait till these things actually become a problem and solve them ahead of time.
Nice one. Way to go. And look, we'll open it up as well if we have any other questions for Zeeshan. Certainly a knowledgeable chap, and I'm sure he could help you out with some problems. Zeeshan, maybe if you want to share in the chat section, you said you've got a blog.
Yeah, absolutely. I can share that.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat there, and I'll be sure to push that out to our audience as well. In our email campaign that will go out probably next week. So, yeah, cool beans. I'll make a note of that. Very good, awesome. Well, look, I think that we've got a question here, Quentin. Alrighty, Zeeshan, how do you manage? Okay, let's change the question there. How do you balance between learning and burnout?
Well, I think it's important to try and learn in a way that you're really enjoying it. It shouldn't feel like too much of a chore. And I think if you're learning things that you're really passionate about, it often doesn't feel like work. However, even learning things you're really interested in, after some time, it can get tiring. So it can be good to just take a break, for a day or a certain amount of time where you say that you're just going to take it easy and not learn as much for that time. Also, if you are learning every day and spending your time learning every day, often what you can do is just reduce the time a little bit, and that can help you recharge a little bit.